Hello, everybody. Welcome back to All Our Parts. Welcome to All Our Parts if you're new here. I'm Jazz. I've been introducing myself with my full name, but a lot of people then got really confused. So I'm going to introduce myself as Jazz. So excited for my guest today. We have been following each other on TikTok, I feel like, since the beginning of both of us really starting TikTok. And so it's really amazing to have her here. She's known as the Blonde Therapist over on Instagram. Sam, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me here. I am really excited to be here. I've been just even obsessed with the name of the podcast forever. I think like it's such a unique approach to what a lot of people are doing right now. So thank you very much for having me.
I'm happy to have you here. And as we were talking offline, part of the show is really digging in, like exploring all parts of us. And so what we were really just talking about is the fact that our therapy hat identities cannot necessarily separated from the very current political chaos that is happening right now. And we previously discussed talking about collective trauma, and what is happening right now is collective trauma. It is this evolving window, it is chaos, it is an unpredictable scenario. Even as I'm recording with you today, I believe in the news that DC is having ice raids today, specifically in restaurants. And so it's literally here now.
Yeah. It has been tumultuous since everything really happened. Just being in this profession, we're told to be blank slate. And that's like something that I've disagreed with since I was really taught that in grad school, because I don't think that's really possible. Because while we have our opinions and feelings, we also have to advocate for the well-being of our clients. And I think so much of what is currently happening is at the disadvantage of so many different people, of so many different religions, sexual orientations, races, ethnicities, and it really just to spiral. I don't know if you've ever seen the meme of it's like the dog and he's sipping coffee and like there's a dumpster fire behind him. Like that's what it's felt like being in this profession where we're trying to hold space for our clients and validate their experiences. But there's also this clusterfuck of a fire going on at the moment. So I think I just have to say, like, for anyone in the mental health profession, and I give you guys credit. What we've had to do is not easy. And for those who are currently like advocating for change and trying to, the angry part of me wants to say dismantle the system, but advocate for reform, kudos to you. Because I think right now we're very much in a place of fear and wanting to be or having to be silenced.
Yeah. I love that you brought up, there's a few things that you said that I really want to touch on, but I first want to even address that our code of ethics does call us to advocate for our clients' well-being. And because of the system that we work in, so many of us are burnout from one-to-one work. So many of us don't always have the energy, capacity, or don't even know where to go to advocate. But social justice is a critical part of our code of ethics as therapists. We're called not just in the therapy room to speak out against like injustices in the world. And so that it's literally what we are called to do as people and as therapists.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I also think that, because there's so much censorship also going on in the world right now, for those of you who aren't even in the mental health field, like I've seen just generally on TikTok and on Instagram, like people putting out videos to say, hey, we live in America, what's actually going on in the world right now that we're not seeing. And to me, I think that just speaks volumes to where we actually are and the
Yeah.
reality of the situation.
Yeah, it's media's creating, again, we curate our timelines, our feeds to see things that we enjoy, but you're also speaking to, I reference it as Big Brother because that's what it feels like is okay, outside of like curating our feeds, there's also this larger entity that's curating our feeds. So we're seeing like consumerism, we're like still shopping, we're still trying to distract ourselves from what's really going on. And that's someone who feels they can just sign an executive order and move on and think that no one will like combat that. And that's just that shows where his mental state is. Hey, but it also I think it's really undermining what we as a people. It's almost like he expects us to turn a blind eye to what's going on.
Yeah, when everything was first going on, I want to say this was maybe like mid to early January-ish. Jon Stewart, who runs The Daily Show, I was watching it and he had done a segment on he is going to push the envelope as far as he can. Like he's going to push everyone's boundaries. He's going to see absolutely what he can and can't get away with. And unless people are willing to fight back against it, we're going to continue to be in this cycle. And I think part of it is that our system has also allowed this to be in place for so. We've had a history of people not really pushing the envelope in certain areas, and here he is really on taking it to the extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
that's where I think
I,
like we have to take a step back and be like, okay, we need to really regroup and even start fresh in certain areas.
yeah. And even as you say that, I'm thinking about therapists who show up on social media who are pushing the envelope, but truly how people are consuming information around mental health, around seeking a provider, looking for someone that works with them. It's therapists who are showing up online as human and being pretty clear in their values because it isn't safe to go into a space where someone is a blank slate anymore. As
Yeah.
you made that statement, I was thinking about early like psychoanalytic where you lay on the couch and you don't really know what the therapist is thinking and they're going full like transference and everything is a projection. It wasn't really that safe then, but now more that because of social media, because we are more aware of group dynamics, the person wants to know what space they're walking into when they are going to confide and potentially talk about the fears around what is happening in their world.
One thing that like I have been like passionate about, especially with myself in like this space, is being not only relatable, which I think is touching into the humanness of being a therapist, but also authentic, right? Like you need to show up as your authentic self because I think that's part of what helps build this therapeutic alliance and rapport with the client. Self-disclosure and smiling and laughing and actually having like facial expressions and gestures. This is what helps a client feel safe in this environment.
How did you decide to start going on social media?
It's actually quite because I'm a very stereotypical anxious perfectionist, so I do tend to overthink and I really think things through. Going on social media was something that I actually didn't really put a lot of thought into. I just sat there one day saying, if I'm going to be in this space, I have to be able to give back. And of course, in this environment. There's the trends, there's the memes, like there's this like lightheartedness to it, but there's also a psychoeducational piece of it where, someone who may not have the education on, for example, trauma or depression or anxiety, for them to see a post about, oh, if I have these traits, this could mean this. And that's not necessarily diagnosing the person, but I think it's sometimes giving them the answer that they need or the push that they need to seek further answers and to seek further help.
Yeah. So you wanted to provide a space where you could be human, authentic, and still be able to educate in an accessible way.
Yeah, I think social media has become a lot of people's primary sources of information and like their outlet, right? Like from everything to when people do like the story times and they're actually like somewhat processing whatever may have happened to them to even like a get ready with me because that's always the really popular one too, right? It's a space that has brung people together. And I think especially in a world right now where everything is so divisive, I think we need this. I think we need it now more than ever.
Yeah. I love that you're speaking to the education piece being interesting and important, but also like we still are working to maintain this lightheartedness, this joy aspect, this community aspect within social media where you become fatigued when you're constantly consuming the news, constantly consuming the bad. And so being able to offer an outlet that provides information and reminds people that we also still have to live. We also deserve to still be able to live in the best way that we can and show up for ourselves. And both of those things are important because we talk to our clients all the time. At least I always say two things can be true at the same time. And so allowing those things to go exist is and modeling that for people publicly is so important.
I think you're right. And I also think with everything that's going on, like I've always said, like humans are meant to be social people. That's how we've operated from like the dawn of time. So we need support, we need community. And I think, especially if there's an individual and their individual experience is just feeling very isolated and alone, I do think that social media can provide someone with the opportunity to feel heard or at least feel like there's somebody out there who can understand them.
Yeah. How do you show up for yourself right now during this time?
It's been challenging. And as you were saying, being absorbed with news, it's literally brought a new definition to doom scrolling. That is absolutely what I've been conceptualizing it at. With the way that my weekend schedule is operating at the moment, I honestly have been trying to spend time with the people that I love and care about, trying to open myself up to new experiences and different things, as well as taking time away from the chaos,
Mm.
right? There's this concept where people talk about comfort shows and movies, right? And the reason that they become comfort shows and movies is yes, there's a sense of joy and happiness that it evokes within you, but also there's comfort in knowing what to expect, right? That's why
Mm.
people rewatch shows over and over again. So I've been trying to lean into that aspect because I
Mm.
think there's also a sense of escapism that involves all of this too.
Yeah. Especially, I want you to talk more about that. So for people who, have experienced trauma, who are experiencing trauma, why is predictability so important?
A lot of times, whether the trauma is based on an environment that you've been in or a relationship or just an overall experience, it's so easy to get lost in it, right?
Mm.
Whether you're lost in symptomatically, like the flashbacks and of it, or you're more of a emotionally based person where it's the emotions of guilt and shame and self-blame and even like berating yourself for what happened, right? It's so easy to get lost into that.
Mm.
And while we can't necessarily undo the past, right, we have to find the ways that we can hold on to reality to keep moving forward.
Yeah. I never even put those things together when I think about comfort shows. Yeah. They're comforting, they're funny, they're lighthearted, but we know them. We know what's coming. We don't need to wonder if we'll like it. We don't need to wonder like if there's anything that we don't know is going to come up. It's literally every line, every scene, you know what to expect. And that offers some ease to the nervous system, really.
It is, even in the sense of like trauma bonds, right? So that's something that people talk about where you've been bonded by like a traumatic experience. Even if it's something where you have been the victim and you're questioning, why do I keep going back to this situation? Why do I keep going back to this person? Because it's what you know.
Hmm.
You have been conditioned to survive in this kind of a place as best as you can. So there is a sense of like security and comfort that it can bring you, even if though it is traumatic and emotionally distressing.
Trauma bond is a phrase that we hear pretty often. It's one that, especially relationally, where people are like, oh, we're trauma bonding because we've experienced the same things, or we're dumping on each other and therefore we're trauma bonding. But what is, like, when you work with clients, how do you describe trauma bonding?
I want to actually split it into two because there's trauma bonding where you're finding like community in what's happened to you. That can happen a lot with trauma groups and like support groups
Hmm.
and things like that. But the actual trauma bonding definition is referring to the relationship a person has, usually between the abuser and the victim, where that reinforces the repeated patterns of abuse. It's a lot of like codependency, and there's usually a lot of fears that come up with it. So it's like fears of abandonment, fear of loneliness, fear of what can happen if you were to leave the cycle. Like it can get very intricate and complicated. But to put it very simply, we're referring to, the relationship that happens between the person that has been abused and the person who abuses and mistreats them.
But it sounds like also a positive connotation though to bonding over like shared trauma. You
Yeah, because
phrased it a
it
little differently too.
exactly, because there's the definition of bonding where people are just getting along and having conversation, but in the psychological world where we're using clinical terms, that's not what trauma bonding refers to. But it's the same thing as where people say there's trauma dump, right? Like I'm sure you like that's a very common term used in like social media and people use today, where they refer it as you're really explaining in depth what's happened to you on usually a single person. That person's just left holding space for what's happened. But for some people, trauma dumping is actually a way of processing it for them. So it's not necessarily black and white. Like there is a little grayness in between that we have to, I would say, investigate with curiosity rather than judgment to see where the person is coming from.
Yeah. Huh. I've never like thought of it in that capacity, but you're right. It's like when we think of trauma groups, when we think of groups in general, when we think of communities where there's a shared experience, like over not only the experience, but the mistreatment of a specific community, the marginalization, and being able to offer a level of understanding that an outsider may not be able to offer.
Yeah, I actually, and I'm like fine speaking about this publicly, but I actually had partake a trauma group for women. And it was one of the most interesting experiences I've ever had because it was actually my first experience being a client in a group because I've facilitated groups, but it's different when you're on that other side of the chair. And to be in it, there's this really delicate space where we have to understand that what you say can trigger someone, but it's
Mhm.
still okay to talk about, right? You don't have to carry the weight of what's happened to you alone.
Yeah, I've never been on the like client side of groups, but when facilitating, I think sometimes even as therapists, we want to create too much of a safe space to the point where like they're sharing over an experience that they can understand. And while it may feel triggering and heavy, it's also their experience that they're trying to process and be able to unpack together and understand one another better, and allowing that opportunity for everyone to build their window of tolerance but also feel really validated and understood is such a special opportunity. And I would love to hear more if you want to share about your experience of being in the group.
Yeah, it's one thing to be a clinician and to talk about trauma and healing from trauma, but it's another thing to be on the other side of it and to be doing the work in your own space. So, the one thing that had really taken me by surprise was actually how much grieving is involved in the trauma healing process because there's so many different factors at play.
Mhm.
Whether you're grieving a relationship, you're grieving the expectation of what could have happened or people changing, you're grieving yourself in a sense, where if, something happened to you and you felt like you could have acted differently or that you could have done something more or less, depending on
Mhm.
the situation. There's also a grieving and a self-forgiveness piece that comes along with it. And I think that's actually one of the most critical aspects to trauma healing. There's a lot of like behavioral work that can happen, right? There's a lot of cognitive work that could happen, but emotionally, grieving is such an important piece of this.
The level of grief, I think, doesn't always even resonate for people. I think a lot of times we reserve the word grief for loss, death related typically, but there is so much that we really grieve. We grieve a past version of ourselves, we grieve a memory, we grieve something that should have been that wasn't. Like it, I don't think we recognize how much grief is intertwined in just our day to day alone. And now, specifically speaking to trauma healing, there's so much loss and rebuilding that happens when doing that work.
Yeah, and I think like the forgiveness piece becomes so critical, but to take it a step further, it also becomes a need for self-love because there is a quote and it's by Rupi Kapoor, and I'm trying not to mess up the quote entirely, but it's something along the lines of it's easy to embrace like the good parts of ourselves, but like true self-love is embracing the difficult parts of ourselves as well. Right? So, in order to start to foster some self-love, there has to be some form of forgiveness.
After someone experiences a traumatic event, why is it so hard for the self love component to be incorporated?
I think it depends on like the reaction that they're having, but most often there's really intense feelings of shame, of guilt, of embarrassment, of self-blame, and I think that emotional piece is so hard to let go of. And we create a narrative within our head and we do it subconsciously. We don't really recognize that we're telling ourselves, oh, I deserved this, or I could have done something more, or I can't believe this happened to me. I'm broken now. And now you've instilled all of these core beliefs, which are just beliefs that you have to be evident about yourself and potentially others in the world. And now it's defined you. And I think a lot of times people talk about trauma as if it's something that is defining them as a whole.
That's why narrative therapy can be so impactful because when someone is sitting with those limiting beliefs that they either inherited from an experience or were told from someone that was very important to them, like a caregiver or someone just really influential, that's the story that we are potentially carrying with ourselves. And that's the story that we are telling ourselves. So if we heard, you're not worthy, or because of these actions, someone deemed me unworthy and therefore I am unworthy, rewriting and retelling our story from an empowered place is so important and it's so hard to get there. It's so hard to learn how to validate yourself when you might not have been validated before.
Yeah. And I think especially there's like when it comes to being in therapy for healing from trauma, there's also this piece of like frustration that comes along with it. And it's such a human and normal experience to have because there's like the age-old quote of healing's not linear, right? You're gonna have your ups and downs. And I think there's this frustration when people are in like of feeling stagnant, of feeling low, of not seeing the change that they want to, that there's this frustration and exasperation that comes along with it of like, why am I not there yet? I've been working at this for so long. What's the holdup? What's preventing me from getting there? But a lot of the times I'll tell people if we were to imagine that graph, right? If you're having ups and downs, that's subsequent of just life, right? We're bound to have these ups and downs. But if you focus on the bottom, as long as you're continuing to move forward, that's a testament to your resilience. That's a testament to your strength.
Does can anyone ever be too resilient?
I think it depends on how they're using their resilience to cope. I think there's resilience in the sense of you're learning to bounce back, you're learning to handle what life has thrown at you. But then there's the resilience of just avoidance and procrastination. One of the most common things that we see in today's society in regards to trauma is people use a lot of humor and sarcasm to cope. I'm on board for that because there is a sense of justification in your mind that has to happen. there's also a way of deflecting, actually holding space for what's happened to you by just continuing to make jokes or talk about something else and change the topic.
Yeah. It's creating a level of separation from you and the experience, which for some people is what they need to even be able to process it.
Right. So that's where like I'm a big fan of like person-centered therapy because you do need to figure out what's going to work for that person. Right? A
Hmm.
lot of times they'll say, okay, if this happened to you, here's a list of coping skills, have at it. That's not really how life works and how you're going to operate because what works for you today is not going to work for you tomorrow. Right? You need to consistently check in with yourself and ask yourself what you need. And if you can't recognize what you need in that moment, work backwards. What are you physically feeling, and how can you
Hmm.
work and tailor your coping skills to that, right? Cognitively, are you in this place of going down the rabbit hole that you need to now pull yourself out of it?
Hmm.
Like it is a bit of an ebb and flow of figuring out how you're going to continue to address what you need in the moment.
Yeah, I love that you're also speaking. It's not just the intellectual part that we have to work with, but there's a somatic piece that we also have to work with. And so, giving someone a worksheet or a list of coping skills and saying, here's the toolbox that you can choose from, rather than curating a person centered one, that takes away from the ability potentially for someone to feel the sensations within their body. Like what's coming up when they're talking about something, what's coming up when they go to perform a certain task or engage in a certain interaction. Creating a person centered coping skills worksheet or a list allows from the person to truly pull from things that resonate with them.
Yeah, and that's why I think you're treating the person holistically, but having to piece together where they're at.
How has being in a group influenced your work as a clinician?
I definitely think it's made me a little more understanding of the stuckness, so to speak. Because as clinicians, like we want our clients to heal, right? We want our clients to progress. The humanness of it all is that we're going to have moments where it just feels like the world is ending, and that's okay.
Yeah, clinicians who have gone through their own healing journeys and have been very present with them, you become a bit more patient with the journey of therapy. Like, yes, we may want to offer the solution or we may see the issue that needs to be resolved. And we also remember and know what it feels like to be in that space where you're stuck, where you don't really see a way out, where it feels impossible to make one step forward. And being okay and comfortable in that space allows for the person to really like sit with like the journey that they're on.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of being in therapy. I think like everyone at some point should go just to get some insight into themselves, but especially in terms of professionals in the mental health field, it really changes your perspective. And I always refer back to the first time that I had been in therapy as a teenager, and I had said to myself, like, this is what I want to do. And part of what led me to that place was having the safe space and the outlet to actually just be myself, to feel what I was feeling, to express myself without fear of judgment or fear of criticism can make the biggest difference in
Mm-hmm.
somebody's life.
What would you say to someone who is on the fence about therapy because they're not sure if the therapist may align with their values or what they need?
You can ask questions, right? Don't be afraid to ask your therapist questions about themselves. I believe in the power of self-disclosure, where a clinician is like talking about themselves and their views within reason, right? Like you don't
Mm-hmm.
want your clinician to just take up their entire session time talking about themselves, but that's what helps build connection. So ask questions. And if you feel like your therapist is somebody who doesn't align with you or somebody that may not understand where you're coming from, it's okay to say this isn't the right fit for yourself. Finding a clinician who is good for you is a process of trial and error. It may take 3 or 4 sessions to see if there's really a connection. And if not, you can request to be transferred to somebody else. You can ask for referrals. There's no shame in self-advocacy.
It I always say therapy is like the therapy room is the place to practice all the things that you may not be able to practice in your own life. And so agency, advocating for yourself, confrontation, like asking for what you need. And also, if there is something in your body that is saying this is not the space to do that, there's so many different avenues that you can take. You can address the therapist specifically. And I always say how the therapist responds is a reflection of like where that therapist is in their journey. But no client should ever feel responsible for how a therapist might react if they say, "Hey, I this is what I need out of therapy," or "I think I may be interested in hearing some referrals." And yeah, we're people too, and it stings, but it's also our job to model like the behavior that we would want our clients to experience in healthy relationships.
I also think the same then goes for the therapist, right? If you're working with someone and you feel like it's not within the scope of your practice, if you find it to bring too much countertransference for yourself, if you find it to be someone that you just feel like you're lost on, there's a difference between challenging yourself to grow as a clinician, but then also doing harm to your client.
Yes. Therapists, we get to set limits. We get to say this is not a fit, and you are not abandoning that client, if you're offering the right referrals, if you are like being true to yourself and recognize this is really a scope that is out of your practice, like that's okay. I always say we are there, no one person is the therapist for everybody. And if you are the therapist for everybody, we need to sit and unpack that for a little bit because that I know I'm not the therapist for everybody and I am okay with that. And we're not meant to be for everybody. That's why there's so many of us. There's so many modalities. There's so many ways of approaching therapy is because there's so many people in the world that need support. And we do our clients a disservice when we step outside of our strengths or our scope of practice. And of course, there's supervision. And even in supervision, you get to say, okay, I think I've hit my limit, I've hit my scope, and we can process what feelings may come up around that because of course I think most therapists are pretty perfectionistic by nature. And so being able to sit with I may not be the right fit for this client and that's okay and I know someone that is and that is not a reflection of my ability as a therapist.
Yeah, like so many therapists have, oh, sorry, I just hit my elbow on the computer. So many therapists have preached about niching down, right? Where you're finding your specialties, you're finding out the populations that you want to work with. In doing that, take a step back and also look at yourself, right? Look at the reasons why you want to do this, making you passionate. If there's a resistance or avoidance to a certain population that you're trying to work with, self-awareness is going to help you on your journey.
Yes. I want to like, put it in big letters and put it on a megaphone. Self-awareness is one of the most important skills that I wish we learned in grad school. Is so much of this work is not going to be an intervention, a technique. It's not going to be any of that. It's going to be your level of self-awareness. Like where is the resistance coming up? Is this something that you can push through and work through your own transference or is this a hard limit? Does this impact your ability to also take care of yourself in your personal life? Being able to sift through that and show up for people is literally so important and it directly impacts the kind of service we're able to give to clients.
Speaking from like a trauma lens, also know your attachment style, know how you respond in terms of conflict, right? If you're somebody who is a people pleaser, that stems from like the fawn response where you're so worried about what people are going to say and what people are going to think, and you overcompensate for that person, that is going to show up in your therapy work, whether you like it or not.
Mm,
If
one
you're
of
the per Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say if you're the person where you're like, if you're like more of a flight response, right? And you avoid, you run away, and you tend to drop things quickly, it's gonna show up.
hmm I had one of my favorite professors would always say, as a therapist, like, we don't have a backpack that we set down outside and are able to compartmentalize the person part of us. There is a backpack that we carry when we go into the therapy room, whether it's what we're going through that week, that month, something that we're processing in our own therapies. All of that comes with us in the space, and noticing it, being aware, sitting with it, and allowing it to be in the room and not, again, like you said, overcompensating for that backpack to be nowhere near it and trying to avoid it is not going to help in like offering the support that your client may need. Wow, I love this conversation. This is like a full roundabout. And I think this is important as we're thinking about collective trauma, how we're thinking about building community, but also it's okay as therapists for us to have limits. Actually, we preach boundaries and we preach to our clients to have their own limits, to have their own expectations. We, as therapists who are also people, we get to have limits to what we are able to tolerate because we're also dealing with our own shit.
Yeah. We're human just as much as your clients are. I was gonna say, and just accepting your limitations may be one of the hardest pieces of the profession for yourself in terms of your own journey, but you're bound to have them. So if you encounter it, I always say, if you imagine it, if you were like running a race and there's hurdles, right? If you miss the hurdle and you fall, you can make the decision to just lay there and stay in it, or you can continue to get up and figure out how to navigate from there.
Yeah. What's a piece of advice you would give to a therapist right now who's really just struggling with self care and finding it hard to balance processing their own stuff as a person while also showing up in the therapy room?
You're not alone. I think that at least half of the people in this profession are right there along with you.
Mm.
Um, don't be afraid to take care of yourself. And that may mean having to set stricter boundaries with yourself, depending on the type of person that you are. Like, if you need to not check the news for a couple of days because it gives you some peace of mind, you're allowed to do that. You need to not talk to somebody who has an opposing belief, or you need to mute them on social media if they're getting a little preachy, like you're allowed to do that.
And you
Even
get to
it.
reschedule your sessions.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. Is that you can reschedule your sessions and take a mental health day. Yes, you can figure out rescheduling, you can figure out financial concerns, like you will be able to handle it, but in order to do good work, you have to be able to take care of yourself. And don't be afraid to seek out supervision. You can be a therapist for 30 years and have the most experience, but we have been navigating unprecedented times for longer than I would like to have been. We've gone through so much within the course of the last 15 years, at least. Okay to sit there and say, I need some extra help right now.
You're in uncharted territory, folks. Seek supervision, seek the support that works for you. Take the mental health day. Do what you need to do to show up for you so that you can show up for other people.
And don't be afraid to use your voice. If you're feeling the urge to speak out, to have agency, to empower others, like use the voice that you have to help others. That's why we're in this profession. Don't fall victim to censorship or the oppression that has been existing.
Yeah. Sam, I have loved this conversation. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you more? Yeah.
So I am both on Instagram and TikTok at the dot blonde dot therapist. And I like would love to come back and continue to have this conversation. I think we definitely don't know what the future holds. So we're just riding the waves at the moment.
We'll love to do a follow-up 2 years from now and see where we all are.
Yeah. If I start off that podcast by screaming, what the fuck? Just roll with it for a minute.
As a closing question to all of my guests, I've been asking, what is your commitment to yourself for 2025?
That's a good question. Because I think a lot of times we like, as people, we deal with like, New Year's resolutions. We think about like goals and things that we want to work on. I think as somebody who is definitely a perfectionist and falls victim to people pleasing, I think for me, 2025 is about putting myself first and learning to challenge myself and to take the risk, even though
I love that. I think you're crushing it so far.
it's.
Thanks
What
for
was
joining me.
yours?
Oh, everyone's been asking some people to be expansive. So to allow myself to make bolder choices and put myself out a little bit more. And also, as we hit the middle of 2025, getting clear on my whys and committing to them
I love that.
and realizing you can't do it all and you don't have to do it all. I realize it's the middle of May, so or middle of the year, so that'll I think. Yeah, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode. Make sure you tap the bell to stay in the loop with new episodes dropping every Friday. If this episode spoke to you, I'd be so grateful if you left a review. It helps others find the show and reminds me why I keep showing up. And if you want to keep the conversation going, come hang with me on socials at Healing with Jasmine. We're healing out loud together.